Hello and welcome to ADHD Mums. In this podcast, we tackle the tough, often unspoken realities of motherhood, neurodiversity, and mental health. I used to think I was a very anxious person. That was the label that made the most sense to me because my body behaved like something was wrong, even when nothing obvious was happening. And so I asked myself a question that a lot of mums ask themselves: do I need therapy? Is this anxiety? Or is this just me? Is this my personality? Because from the inside, it felt constant. And at one point in my 20s, I made a really big decision based on the story that I was a very anxious person. And I decided to stop studying at university and pursuing something that I really wanted. And honestly, I wish I had have continued because I've since found out that I have dyscalculia, which is basically dyslexia with numbers. And I felt like my levels of anxiety around that were so high that the answer for me was to quit studying at university. Not because I wasn't capable, but because I thought I couldn't handle the stress, that the anxiety was causing me to have such great distress that I really should quit university and stop pushing myself too hard. And so the answer seemed naturally to remove the pressure. So I stepped away. I reduced the demand and I waited for my body to settle. But it didn't. And the anxiety continued regardless of whether I studied or not. Later on, something similar happened at work. I was working for someone who I genuinely believed was causing me significant anxiety. So I left because I felt that was the answer. I went to a different job, different expectations, different context. And I told myself that this should fix it. But the anxiety stayed. So I updated the explanation in my mind. Maybe it's not work. Maybe it's people. Maybe this is just how I am in relationships. Later on the next year, I went on a holiday. No deadlines, no responsibility, no people needing anything from me. And what do you know? The anxiety was still there. Same tight chest, same sense of bracing for something. Anxiety should respond to reduced pressure, shouldn't it? But this didn't. It was a pattern or a rule in my nervous system that was still running. That was the moment that things stopped adding up. Because if this was purely situational, it should have dropped away by reducing the demand. If it was just stress, changing the conditions should have changed my body, shouldn't it? But it didn't. And then there were other moments where someone was very clear with me, where expectations were explicit, where responsibility was properly handed over and I knew what was mine and what wasn't. And then my body would settle almost immediately. My shoulders would drop, my breath would slow. Same brain, same history, same person, different conditions. And that was the moment that I realized this wasn't just about the way I felt, it was about what had changed. So here's what was actually happening. My brain wasn't reacting to the present, it was reacting to a prediction. And that's what predictive processing is. My nervous system was always asking, what's about to happen? What do I need to prepare for? And it prepares before anything goes wrong. So at some point earlier in my life, my system learned a rule. Not a thought, not a belief, a rule. Something like, if I'm not alert, something will slip. If I stop scanning, I'll miss a problem. Probably because I was an ADHD girl in the school system, forgetting things regularly and learning that I need to remember every single thing to get it right to be that good girl. Perhaps that was it. But once that rule forms, the body does a great job. Tight chest, vigilance, early morning activation, the braced feeling before anything has happened. And this is the part that a lot of people miss. That rule doesn't update just because you understand it. When you have the moment of clarity, yes, it feels good, but it only updates when your prediction fails repeatedly. And that's why just the insight didn't help. That's why reducing pressure didn't help. Yes, I changed the situation, but the prediction stayed the same. I stopped studying, left jobs, changed environment, went on a holiday, and it didn't change. Because from my nervous system's point of view, nothing had proven the rule wrong yet. So combine the predictive processing, which a lot of other mums listening would definitely have as well. Combine that with roles that are unclear. For me, that is a recipe for anxiety. I don't know about you, but people become very hyper alert when responsibility is unclear and you're conscientious, or perhaps you're running that good girl story that I run. So when expectations are implied, but they're not stated really clearly, sometimes the ownership is fuzzy. And it's not obvious about who's holding what, because your nervous system, if it's anything like mine, might treat a little bit of confusion or things that are unclear as risk. And so it monitors constantly. And that monitoring costs a lot of energy. And this is exactly what I noticed when I was in situations where expectations were clear, responsibility handed over clearly, nothing left hanging. I felt reassured. So my system didn't need to stay on guard anymore. And that's why a holiday didn't help. But yet, clean handovers in a different job did help. So when I had clarity around this, I did go and seek therapy. And it helped in a really specific way, creating safe prediction errors. Moments when your system expected, if I stop scanning, something bad will happen to me, and nothing did. Once is not enough, understanding and clarity is not enough, but repeated evidence to your brain, that's what updates the rule. Same body, same brain, different prediction. Some systems do run with higher baseline arousal, always a bit more alert, always a bit more on, but it didn't explain the speed of it settling. Because when I received clarity, my anxiety came down really quickly, and it's always been the way for me. But noticing this tells me something important. It wasn't stress intolerance or me being fragile. It was me being intolerant of things that are unclear, and a learned adaptation that made sense to me. This actually points to a really clever system that is doing exactly what it was trained to do. Until the rule was made visible and tested, and it could see a different way forward, and I could create a new rule just by doing this repetitively. But sometimes what you're feeling isn't about the mood at all. It could be about what your system has been asked to hold and how it's coped. And here's a way to tell the difference. When something is driven by anxiety or stress, it usually changes when the pressure changes. Less demand, more rest, clear relief. But some patterns, if you notice in your life, don't behave like that. They stay even when you've changed all of that, and it should, air quoting, be getting better. You could find that these patterns or this depression, burnout, anxiety stays even when there is nothing obviously going wrong. You might stop, rest, take a holiday, the kids are okay, there's no crisis. You've moved on from the job that was causing you stress. And that's when people start thinking, maybe I'm depressed, maybe I'm just anxious, is this who I am? But here is a clue that a lot of mums often miss. Notice what happens when the situation changes, not how you feel, but how the situation is structured. For example, something I hear quite often is that if you feel the worst when everything is quiet and you're mentally holding a list of what needs to be remembering, what could go wrong, what you have to fix later, that's sustained vigilance. And if rest doesn't actually help, but certainty does, that tells you something important. It doesn't mean you don't experience anxiety or burnout, but it might mean that those don't explain what's maintaining the pattern that keeps that going. So please don't use this episode to decide what's air quoting wrong with you, but use it to ask yourself a different question. Does this shift when the load reduces or only when the responsibility is clear? Because patterns that respond to rest and patterns that respond to clarity are not the same thing. And treating them the same is what keeps people stuck and not understanding why they aren't feeling a little bit of relief from the anxious feelings, the depressed feelings, or the burnout feelings. And they don't know why they are still stuck. I hope this was helpful. I'd love you to grab your phone, your notes, and start to track your mood and what helps and what doesn't help. And prepare for it not necessarily to make sense. I went back into a more stressful job, I thought, but because things were clear and responsibility well defined, I coped completely fine. Yet the other job that actually had less stress, I think, from the outside, I couldn't cope with. So have a look at the clues and investigate the why. When have you felt really good and when haven't you? And what is the common pattern? I hope this was helpful. Thank you so much for listening. See you next week.
Quick announcement. Did you know that we have an ADHD Mums shop filled with resources designed just for you? These resources are packed with answers to the most frequently asked questions I get sent in via email. Everything from understanding ADHD and autism to practical tips for daily life. There's also a free assessment tool. If you're wondering about ADHD or autism for yourself or your little one, don't forget to check out the free assessment tool under free resources section on my website, adhdmums.com.au.